So we're going to look at some key scriptures. You can write these scriptures down. I'll read them as we go. But Proverbs 22, verse 7, Romans 13, verse 8, and Psalm 37, verse 21.
Psalm 27?
Psalm 37, verse 21. All right. So debt can be a significant burden, both financially and spiritually. The Bible offers guidance on prudent borrowing, responsible lending, and the moral implications of debt. So I want to look at these principles, which actually encourage us as believers to handle debt in a way that honors God and then also maintains personal integrity. Right? So the burden of debt, Proverbs 22 verse 7 tells us the rich rule over the poor and the borrower is servant to the lender. This verse highlights the power dynamics of debt and the potential loss of freedom. It cautions against becoming enslaved by financial obligations, right? That's the conundrum with debt, is we lose our freedom. Right? You become a slave to the lender, right? So when times are hard, our debt isn't reduced. We still have to pay it or face the consequences of it. The call to owe nothing but love. Romans 13 verse 8 says, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. This directive encourages believers to strive towards financial independence and avoid long-term debt, which can hinder one's ability to live freely and give generously. And then Psalm 37 verse 21, right, the righteousness of repaying debts. The wicked borrow and do not repay, but the righteous give generously. The scripture contrasts the righteous who manage their resources responsibly and uphold their commitments with the wicked who disregard their obligations. It underscores the importance of fulfilling our financial commitments as a reflection of our integrity and faithfulness. One thing I've learned about times where things are tough is to live with, say you're earning $100, live as if you're earning 70, right? So you can always store the 30. It's a good practice just to put into practice in your life. So don't think, well, I've got 100, I can go buy this. Think, no, I have 70, the 30's put away, right? And live that way. So you've always got a reserve, whether you're using it in ministry or just for a rainy day. There's always a reserve, right? Stewardship is a huge principle taught in the Bible. We can talk about faith all we want, but faith involves stewardship, right? It's all together. When we teach the Bible, we teach the whole Bible, not just nitpicking little verses here and there, right? So we got to ask ourselves, what steps can you take to reduce your current debt and avoid future debt, right? I know for us, I won't buy anything unless we can pay for it. I won't get into debt just because of where we've come from. Not that we can't, is that I don't want to. Even coming to Canada, we had to get into huge debt just to live here when we first got here, because we got here with nothing, right? So we needed a car, we needed a place to stay, we needed clothes, right? And we got here with absolutely nothing and landed up getting into debt in two countries instead of just in our home country where we were and where we left, right? So we landed up paying debt back to two different countries. It's all paid now, but it took a lot of hard work and time to repay it all. And honestly, we didn't repay any of it until I started putting the principles that I had learned through reading the Bible into practice in our life by understanding stewardship properly, putting money aside, paying our debts off as fast as possible, and then living as if we didn't have what we had. That's how I did it, right? Paying our debts off as fast as possible was a key thing to me. So I paid it. If my debt was $30 a month and I had 100 spare, I'd pay the 100 into the debt to bring it down. The faster you can bring that down, the less interest you're paying, and the faster your debt gets paid off, right? And that's what we did. So that's how our house got paid off very quickly, was putting whatever we had into our house, which reduced the amount of interest we had to pay, which helped our house payments come down, or not our payments come down, but our price of our house came down very quickly because of that, right? So instead of paying 15 years of debt or interest, and then 10 years on our house, it was paying like the first 5 years of interest while we were learning these principles that I'd started picking up, and then the house was paid for, just because we hit it so hard, right, and got rid of it, which freed us up to live now, right, because we don't have that burden of paying a mortgage every month, like most people do today, right? We hit the debt hard and got rid of it, and that was the end of that. Same with vehicles and everything else. Credit card debt, in Canada, I think I had up to 50,000 at one stage, personal, right? Because, I mean, we just moved to a new country, we needed to live. That too, I hit it hard. We smashed it down. And once I closed those personal cards, I never reopened any personal credit cards. I left them. If we don't have money for it, I won't buy it. Simple as that. We'll save up, we'll get the money, and then we'll buy it. If we can't say, if it's something that we absolutely need right now, then we'll buy it on credit, right? That's how I think, business-wise. We don't do it personally. I'll buy it on credit, but I'll hit it down very quickly. So I won't just pay the minimum payment. I'll triple it or quadruple it or times 5 and get rid of it very fast. So it doesn't exist. No, you're just paying interest for the first 10 years, and you're lucky if the last 5 years even helps you if it hasn't built up too hard, right? So that's how we'll, like our company vehicles and things, that's what we do, right? There's no point paying cash for company vehicles because you can't write them off with taxes, right? So pay them down and make sure that you got the money to pay them off if something goes wrong. Otherwise, you'll be in the same place again, right? And so that's kind of how, well, not kind of how, that's how we live, right? I won't get into debt with anything. Like even now, Vanessa will tell you with the threat to the border and stuff, I told everybody, no spending money. That's not, we cut. End of story. Because we need to make sure that if we're going into a 1 or 2 year problem, that we're fine for 1 or 2 years. It won't matter to us, right? Or however long it takes. If we keep spending stupidly when there might be an issue, well, then what do you do when things run dry? There's no topping anything up because you run out of all your money, right? You're spending irresponsibly. So we stop spending on anything that we don't need to, and we spend much less, right? So now instead of putting 30 aside and only spending the 70 we need to live on, I'll put 50 aside, and now we'll live on 50 instead of on 70, right? So if who knows, maybe half of Saskatoon shuts down because they don't still steel for the next 6 months, right? Or steel price goes up 75%, who knows? It's just, I'm thinking far ahead, it'd probably never get that bad, but it would get bad enough that it would slow down industry drastically, right? That we can still sustain through that and not have to change the way we live. Right? So that's how I put things in place, right? You can't just go to a tree and pick money off it every day. It doesn't work that way, right? Eventually you'll pick the seed and nothing will grow, right? So you've got to be careful with your money. In times like this, I quickly gear that way. I'm used to living that way because of growing up in South Africa, right? The economy was always up and down because the place was sanctioned most of my life there. So you just get used to being careful that way, right? And then as I learned the principles of the Bible in the last 13 years or so, then I just didn't go back into debt. We paid it off and just stayed out of it, right? I never wanted to be a slave to the lender, right? And not that we couldn't afford to pay something off, it's that I don't want to in case something happens and I'm still stuck paying something when I'm still struggling to get an income, right? So I'd rather live without it and save until I can afford it, which you'll be surprised, you can do it very quickly because you're not paying the interest, right? So you're just putting money away for the actual thing you're going to buy. And even if you do end up having to finance some of it, if you can save majority of it, your interest is much lower, right? So you'll be paying a much smaller amount that you could probably handle through tough times instead of being stuck. There's like people who have maybe bought their house in the last few years, they've overpaid, right? When the market does balance eventually, because it will, it'll come back down in years, well, however long it takes, it'll eventually come back down and you're not going to be able to sell your house because it's worth more than the market, right? So you're stuck paying a high rate on your house that you can't sell because it's worth less than what you owe on it. And that's what you have to be careful of, right? It's okay if you own your house and your mortgage is a few $100 a month, then whatever, you're not planning on moving. But if you bought one now in one of these new estates and you've paid $500 for a house that in reality is only worth $250, When house prices come back to normal, your house is worth 250 and you still owe 500 because the bank's not dropping their rate for you, right? You're still paying what you paid for it. So it's just to be careful, right? And be clever with your money as well. If you don't steward your money well, your money can't grow, right? You need to learn to steward it well. So by reducing and avoiding debt, or reducing and avoiding debt requires a disciplined approach to financial management. We need to begin by creating a detailed budget to track income and expenses, identifying areas where spending can be reduced. And Vanessa will tell you that's what I still do it now with Excel sheets, just on the computer, right? I used to write it in books before I had an Excel program, and I'll put everything down to the cent in an Excel sheet, and then I'll see what we don't actually need, and I'll just get rid of it. Like, we don't need it, let's just lose it, right? I said to her this last week, we'll just drop things like Netflix, we'll get rid of stuff like that. Not that we have to, it's that we don't need it. The economy is getting tight, let's get tight with it so we don't struggle later, right? So lose Netflix, lose all these stupid things that are like a perk in your life that you could be doing something else in that time, right? There's no reason to hang on to them. And I do that very quickly. It doesn't matter to me, right? The dogs will go straight to the SPCA because I'm not feeding a dog's mouth when I got family to feed and people are starving on the streets, right? And she'll tell you that's what I said. And it won't change, it won't affect me in the slightest. It's just because I don't think like most people. You got to cut, all right? It'll affect you long term, and in countries like this, if you die, it'll affect your children, all right? Somebody's still paying the debt, so you got to be very careful. So identify areas where spending can be reduced. Prioritize paying off high interest debts first, and avoid taking on new debt unless necessary, right? So anything high interest, so like what I did is our credit cards at that time, 12 years ago, were like 23 or 24% because we were new to the country, right? I focused on hitting those things down first. The high interest credit card we had, knocked that down as fast as possible. Then I went to the next high interest thing, which I think at that time was like furniture or something, from Leon's or whatever. And then I knocked that down, and that's how I did it. So the high interest ones, you knock it down, get rid of those high interest ones because you're actually throwing money to the bank and you're not actually paying off your item, right? So you hit those down fast, so you pay your item off, right? And then go to the next one, so you pay your item off. Otherwise, you're just paying interest for the next 10 years, and then the last 2 years, you're actually only paying for what you bought. Right? That's how interest works, right? And nobody lends you money for free. They charge you an arm and a leg for it. So yeah, start with your high interest debts, knock those down first, right? The rest of the stuff, keep paying your minimum payments, but your high interest debts, pay as much as you can into it, right? If you've got a choice between going to McDonald's and putting money into your high interest debt, pay your debt, right? That's how you get out of these things quickly. And then avoid taking on new debt unless necessary. There's lots of financial advisors and people you can talk to, especially around this city, because most people are in debt in Canada. It's just the nature of life in this country, right? That can help you strategically plan. A lot of banks will help you too, but remember they charge you. They don't do it for free, right? To knock it down and get rid of it. Yeah, so I just wanted to share that bit with you, just because of the complexity of our country at the moment. 13 verse 8, Romans 13 verse 8, Psalm 37 verse 21, and Proverbs 22 verse 7. 22:7. Yeah. You got to think in a climate, if something does happen and our border gets shut, you got to think things that people get laid off, right? Car factories won't last a week. When the bridge got shut, they didn't last 2 days, right? They're not going to lose money. Just lay off. Right? Lay off. Even potash, right? With the border closing, it affects potash too. There's so much that it affects. The energy sector is basically hooped because the Liberal government has stopped us from selling energy anywhere else in the world, right? So you keep that stuff in mind and start putting money away for that rainy day, and not fearfully, just carefully, right? So when something happens, there's always money there. If you've got enough money stashed away that's like 2 months worth of your wage, you know you're 2 months good, right? To find something else. Maybe you find something that's half your pay, right? But you've still got that stash to help you. So now you're earning half your pay and you've got the 2 months to lean back on, right? So very important to put something away and look to the future, right? And if you're putting stuff away, don't put it away by keeping it from God, because you're just wasting your time, right? It doesn't work that way, because now your money's become your, right? And it doesn't work that way. You still need to keep your trust in Him, but remain faithful, right? And faithful is correct stewardship, being responsible, and so on and so forth, right? And look how many people struggled through COVID. Right, when COVID hit, nobody had any reserves. Nobody had anything. They had to rely on the government. Many of them had to pay it back. Some of them were just plain lazy, right? But everything just came to a shutdown, and people were in dire straits, right? I can tell you the only people they didn't lose was the banks, right? But normal families suffered. And something like the border shutting down would do the same thing again, right? Whether it does or it doesn't, it doesn't matter. Learn to be responsible with your money. And when things do happen, it won't matter, right? You'll make it through. All right, you get that?